We're talking about the Kennebec River, which is one of the two major rivers in the state of Maine. Its headwaters are Moosehead Lake up in the northwestern part of the state, and it flows about 150 miles to the ocean. Technically, it is a tidal estuary, but it's commonly accepted as a river. It is not salty up this far, although it is tidal out here. I have had an argument in this very room. Well, of course it's got to be salt out here. Where did they cut the ice? So along comes a neighbor who grew up here and older than I. I said, Nina, can you tell this person where the ice was cut? Right out here. She says there were ice houses down in Merritt Bay, which is, well, 8-10 miles south of here, but it's not salty up here unless it was a complete drought and no fresh water coming downriver. The first record we found of ice being taken out of the Kennebec was in 1816, when a brig by the name of Orion was frozen in Gardner over winter, and they didn't have an outgoing cargo, so there was these blocks of ice floating by, and they hauled it on board and took it south, and I think they made $700 on it. It went along for 45 years, and apparently there was some harvesting, commercial harvesting upriver. But then the Kennebec got on one of its tirages and broke up the ice, and the ice field in the Gardner, Augusta area. And we had access to a diary by a Reverend John Beadle, who was a neighbor of ours, that said this was after the middle of January, that there was great excitement because the iceman, the businessman, came down this area from Gardner, Augusta, and looked out for places to build ice houses and store the ice. And I guess almost immediately people either sold their river frontage, or in the case of my great-grandfather, he leased the river frontage. And I think he was, in many ways, he was smart in doing it. But why so many companies, so many people wanted so much ice all of a sudden, we don't understand. But from, say, the 20th of January, 1870, to ice out in March, they leased or bought the land, they graded, they started buildings such as you see here, and worked on them. They were also working to build elevators, like you see here, get the equipment down that hopefully hadn't gone into the river when the ice broke up the river. There's a record of 60, I think, million board feet of lumber coming down on the cars. The railroad track is right on the west shore of the Kennebec along here. They started building. The same gentleman recorded where he worked, he and his son as well, worked grading, building. His son got to be a supervisor of the building of one set, the berry houses that this depicts. And the elder gentleman, he did board in, he shingled, he records how much they were being paid a day, which wasn't very much. Then they started running the ice in, and he spoke about how strange it was to see the ice going up the elevator. The ice would freeze to even too much depth. They'd like to have the ice when it was cut, or when they started cutting, 12 to 14 inches thick. The local men got work on the ice, or building the houses, working on the ice. The horses, good many of them were nearby so they could go home at night. But then there was times when they were coming from, say, 10 miles away, and they didn't want to. Number one, if they'd worked the horses all day, they didn't want to make them walk another 10 miles and get a little sleep and hay and grain and walk 10 miles to be back on the river at daylight the next day. So the women folks took in boarders. Practically anyway, each set of houses had a boarding house associated with it. There was one on this place, there was one on my place, is the next to north, and the third right along, boom, 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 there was a boarding house on that for that set of houses. The same gentleman recorded that his wife was taking in boarders. They had one night. They had, I can't remember, I'd have to look it up, but it got so, and they only had a small Cape house. They had 12 boarders at one time. My great-grandparents were very cautious about who they took in. They didn't take in any old tramp off the road, but and some of the men remained lifelong friends. They got the houses full. They ran ice up the elevator, cut it and ran up the elevator way after dark to get it before the ice went out. Got so thin and broke up and went out. But they did by sometime in March, they had the houses full. And that is one of the more amazing parts of it, that they could build and harvest and store within 2 months.